The haunting whisper. When an imaginary friend turns deadly. The screams started 3 weeks ago. At first, Kelly simply said she didn't want to sleep because her friend wouldn't let her. My son, Matt, and I thought it was just a phase, a symptom of teenage whims, especially after the recent divorce between me and my wife. Matt would just shake his head in annoyance, unable to understand why his sister was acting so strangely. But when Kelly started talking about her friend wanting to kill, everything changed. Kelly had always been a quiet, introverted girl. She had just turned 15 and had never been very close to others, preferring solitude. After our divorce, I noticed she became even more withdrawn, but I chalked it up to stress and her trying to adapt to the new circumstances. She often mentioned her friend, which at first didn't worry me. My ex-wife and I thought she had invented an imaginary friend to cope with the pain and loneliness. But one night, Kelly looked at me with darkened eyes and quietly said that her friend had told her to kill Matt. I remember that moment as if it were yesterday. I was sitting on the couch when I heard her voice through the cracked door. Kelly was whispering, as if having a conversation with someone. When I asked her who she was talking to, she nervously laughed. "My friend," she replied. I tried to learn more about this friend, but Kelly just stared at me with empty eyes and said she doesn't like Matt. She wants him dead. And Mom too. A cold dread washed over me. I tried to talk to my ex-wife, but she dismissed it, chalking it up to teenage drama. "You're worrying too much, she's just acting out her emotions," she said. But I knew it was more than that. That very night, Matt woke up screaming, claiming he saw Kelly standing in the dark by his bed. He swore she was talking to someone in the emptiness. The next day, I decided to sleep on the couch near their rooms, to be closer if anything happened. But during the night, I heard footsteps. Cautiously stepping into the hallway, I saw Kelly standing in the middle of it. She was staring at me, but her gaze was empty and her face looked foreign. In a voice that didn't sound like hers, she said, "She wants Matt. She'll do it." The next morning, I tried to convince Kelly to see a psychologist, but she went hysterical. She screamed, throwing things, insisting that her friend wouldn't allow it. My ex-wife panicked and finally agreed to seek help. The doctor prescribed light sedatives, but it didn't seem like enough. A few days later, Matt started complaining of chest pain, like something was suffocating him. He was plagued by nightmares, saying Kelly's friend came to him every night and stood at the foot of his bed. He looked increasingly exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. Meanwhile, Kelly was becoming more distant, colder, as if her heart had frozen. That week, I found crosses made of dry twigs under Matt's bed. Kelly began drawing strange symbols on her bedroom walls with red paint. She claimed her friend told her to do it to protect us all. But it was clear this wasn't protection. I didn't know what else to do. In desperation, I went to the local church and spoke with Father Samuel. He listened to me with a serious expression and, to my surprise, wasn't shocked by what he heard. "I've heard similar stories before," he said. "This may be more than just a psychological issue." He agreed to come to our house to see what could be done, though he remained skeptical. When the priest arrived, Kelly locked herself in her room, screaming that he wasn't welcome there. Matt, on the other hand, was restless, complaining of severe headaches. Father Samuel began praying in the living room, and that's when things got worse. Kelly started banging on her door, screaming that her friend was furious. She didn't stop pounding, as if trying to break through. The priest looked at me, and I saw anxiety in his eyes. He said he would need help, that this was beyond his abilities. But before he could leave, Kelly's door burst open with a loud crash. She stood in the doorway with a bizarre smile, her eyes glazed over. "She's here," Kelly said, pointing to the empty space beside her. "She wants to talk to you." The air in the room grew heavy. Father Samuel began praying again, but Kelly let out a blood-curdling scream, scratching at her skin as if trying to tear something out from inside. The sound of her screams was piercing, bone-chilling. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. Kelly collapsed to the floor, but before she lost consciousness, she whispered, "She won't stop until she gets what she wants." I took Kelly back to the doctor, but nothing helped. By then, Matt was completely terrified and refused to be in the same room as his sister. He kept saying Kelly's friend was getting closer every night. The priest, now fully convinced that this was not just a psychological issue, brought another clergyman to help. That night, they decided to perform a special prayer in Kelly's room. As they prayed, the lights began flickering, and a foul odor filled the air. Kelly started convulsing on her bed, her eyes rolling back as she mumbled incomprehensible words. It was as if her body no longer belonged to her. The terror on Matt's face was clear. He looked at me and whispered, "She's here, Dad. Right behind you." I quickly turned, but I saw nothing, only felt an icy chill creeping up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. It felt like the house itself was turning against us. The next night, the nightmare continued. I woke up to find Kelly sitting at the edge of Matt's bed, whispering something in his ear. I rushed to her, but when I tried to pull her away, she pushed me with a strength she shouldn't have had. Her face twisted into a sinister smile, and she said, "Now she wants you too." In desperation, I begged the priest to do something. He agreed to perform an exorcism, even though he wasn't authorized by the church. This was our last hope. Kelly was no longer herself. She spent all her time muttering to the empty space, speaking to this friend that now seemed terrifyingly real. During the exorcism, things spiraled out of control. Kelly screamed, her eyes rolling back as the priest struggled to maintain control. Suddenly, the window shattered, and a gust of wind rushed in, nearly knocking everything over. "She won't leave," Kelly screamed, her voice distorted, as if two voices were speaking at once. The exorcism lasted for hours. The room was a wreck, and the priest looked exhausted. But when it finally ended, Kelly collapsed, unconscious. The silence that followed was deafening. The priest, trembling and drenched in sweat, whispered, "She's gone. For now." Kelly never returned to her old self. She was soon admitted to a psychiatric facility, and Matt's life began to return to normal. But occasionally, he still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, claiming he feels someone standing by his bed. Something tells me that this friend never really left. And every time I pass by Kelly's empty room, I feel a chill run down my spine. As if someone is watching me from the shadows. I met the Dark Watchers. I've been sitting on this one for a while, but I think it's time to share it. This happened about 3 years ago, and I was without a doubt the worst kind of hiker. You know those guys who are all about leaving no trace, bagging their garbage, burying their waste, cleaning up their campsite, and respecting nature's beauty. Yeah, that wasn't me. I liked camping. My parents liked camping, but there was always this mentality of the woods will take care of things. I remember my dad leaving a whole cooler full of empty beer cans at the site once when I was 8. We even brought a couch on a camping trip just because Dad knew there was a ravine nearby. Broken fishing rods? Left by the creek. Garbage? Right on the ground. Hell, we left a whole tent once because Dad couldn't get it back in the bag. We didn't use campgrounds either. Dad and Mom would pack up and find somewhere in the middle of nowhere, live off the land for a couple of days, and then leave their junk behind. I can't say that this is why I am the way I am, but it definitely influenced me. I knew better than to litter and be a pig, but in my head, the woods would always just take care of themselves. They'd been around for millions of years, why would my trash mess with that? If my styrofoam cooler killed a couple of trees, they didn't deserve to be there, right? At least, that's what I thought. I go camping about 3 times a year, the start of spring, the start of summer, and the end of summer. I live in California, so I always just pack up my pickup, grab some food, beer, and recreational greenery, and head out somewhere remote. A buddy of mine from work wouldn't shut up about this overlook about an hour from the city, right outside the Santa Lucia mountain range, so I figured I'd crash out there for a weekend. Unlike my parents, I'm not a living off the land kind of person. I brought food, I brought supplies, and I intended to do nothing but sit in the wilderness, sleep in my hammock, and get high. I called out on Friday and found the perfect spot by lunchtime. It was gorgeous, overlooking the valley, and so remote that if I got hurt, I'd probably die out there with no one the wiser. I set up my hammock, laid out my fire logs, got some water just in case, and spread out a bit. I made some lunch, sandwiches, rolled a joint, and mellowed out as the day wore on. It was nice out there, just watching the clouds and listening to nature. I was soon pretty lit, and as the sun started to creep down, I lit my fire. There was probably a burn ban in effect, but I had water and I didn't care. No one was going to see me out there anyway, and I started roasting hot dogs as the sun cut a fantastic line across the sky. That was the first time I noticed them. I remember looking up and whispering shit as I mistook them for rangers or cops or something. They were just silhouettes on the ridge not far from my camp, 3 or 4 of them, and they had these wide, flat-topped hats like park rangers or the guy on the oatmeal box. I watched them for a minute, thinking I was busted, but they just stood there. They didn't move, didn't call out, but I knew they saw me. My fire had to be visible for miles at this height, and the longer they stayed there, the more creeped out I felt. Why were they just standing there? If they wanted me to leave, why not just tell me? I didn't know, but once the sun set, I noticed they had vanished and just kind of kept an eye out. I had my gun, a big .45, so I wasn't worried, but I suddenly wished I had a tent instead of just a hammock. I sparked up again after eating a pack of dogs, and that took care of any thoughts of shadowy figures or whatever. I dozed off in my hammock but dreamed about them that night too. I dreamed they were in my campsite, just standing around and watching me. They were like the outlines of people, like when someone stands in front of the sun and all you get is a burnt-out image of them. They didn't have any features, no eyes or anything, and I was frozen there as they looked at me. They didn't say anything, they just watched me, and it felt like being sleep paralyzed the whole night. I woke up after dawn, almost fell out of my hammock, and started making breakfast as I stirred up the ashes of last night's fire. I wondered if it had really been a dream, but it felt like it must have been. Why would they come and look but not say anything? All my stuff was there too, right down to the hot dog wrapper I'd left on the ground next to the fire, and I absent-mindedly tossed it in as I ate my eggs and ham. The ice was still holding out, it was spring and not too hot yet, so I decided to go on a forest pub crawl. Translation: I put a bunch of beer in my backpack and walked out into the woods for a drunk hike. I spent about 5 hours hiking in the woods, tossing my empty bottles into the trees as I finished them. Some of them broke, most didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I never saw anything, it wasn't like I spotted someone hiding behind a tree, but it was like there were deep pockets of shadow that shouldn't have been there. It was midday, the sun was high, and I should have had major visibility. Even so, I found myself looking around as the creeping feeling got worse and worse. Some of it was due to being drunk in the hot woods with no water, and when I found a stream, I plunged my face in to get a little clarity. I drank a little. Dad always said running water was fine to drink from, and when something snapped not far from me, I looked up like a zebra at a watering hole. I looked around, trying to find what was stalking me. There was nothing, just the quiet forest and the gently rushing stream. No, I didn't believe that. I had felt stalked all day, and as I watched the trees, I was sure something moved out there. I got up and started running, the zebra analogy too hard to shake, and I kept waiting for the claws to sink in, the teeth to bite, and the hot breath to fall on my neck. It was going to happen at any minute, I could feel it, and when I tripped over a fallen log, I just lay there and waited for the end. It would get me now. It would get me, and I'd be dead. I'd be dead. I'd be. Nothing happened. I lay there for nearly 10 minutes, just knowing it would get me if I moved, but it never came. When the ants started biting my legs, I sat up and swiped at them. I had fallen next to an ant bed that I had accidentally stomped on in my haste, and they were mad as hell about it. I ended up going back to the creek to wash them off, a haphazard trip that took another 10 minutes, and I was still looking around like a scared animal. I sat with my legs in the creek until they stopped throbbing, and then I made my miserable way back to camp. It was not as much fun walking back as it had been walking out, and I was jittery and tense the whole way. The sun was starting to slip down, and I absolutely didn't want to be out there when it got dark. Too many things could be crunching around out there in the dark. I made it back to camp before it got dark, and as I cooked my dinner, the sun started to ride low again. It was more hot dogs tonight, cooked over the fire, but I couldn't finish all of them. I was too scared to look away from the ridge, and I ended up burning more than one of them. They tasted fine either way, but I had eyes only for the shadows on the ridge. They had the same wide-brimmed hats, a few of them had canes, but none of them were really people. They were like shadows, the burned images at Hiroshima, or the photo negatives that sometimes get burned into old photographs, at once there and not there at all. They just stood there, watching me. They didn't move, didn't stir, and as the sun sank, I became colder and colder. I should have gone to my truck and left, but I didn't. I made myself put it out of my mind. I convinced myself that I was being foolish. When it got dark, I got into my hammock and tried to get comfortable, but I couldn't. My leg hurt. I was sunburned. I was hungover. I was dehydrated, and ultimately, I was afraid. I was afraid that when I closed my eyes, they would get me. I was afraid they would just carry me off in the night, and I would never be seen again. They would find my truck and my campsite, but never me. Maybe, I thought as I finally nodded off, someone would look up one afternoon at sunset and see me on that ridge, just watching. I must have fallen asleep, and I like to think I dreamed what came next. I want to, but I can't convince myself that I did. I woke up and saw them standing around me. I could see them, and not just the ones in front of the fire. They were darker than the night somehow, and they began to creep closer to me. Crept is the wrong word, though. They slid along the ground like ghosts in some of the horror movies I'd watched as a kid. They hemmed me in, my body shaking, but my voice stuck in my throat. I didn't dare move, I didn't dare speak, and as they knelt around me, I heard whispering. It was a terrible sound, and it still follows me into sleep sometimes. You come here to the womb of creation and leave your waste. You are a brainless creature fit only to destroy things made by your betters. You burn the wood of a creature who existed before you were even a twinkle in your father's eye. You destroy a place that was new when this planet cooled. You throw your trash into a home shared by 100 billion organisms, and you claim to be superior, the better. You are nothing, and you will die and be forgotten. On and on and on. They whispered endlessly to me, telling me how worthless I was, how I was a nuisance and a nothing, and how I would never change. Then, one of them rose up over my hammock, his body seeming to hang over me like a shadow cast from above. He looked like them, but he was clearly their leader, and when he brought the cane down on nothing but air, I heard it crack like a thunderbolt. Go back to your stinking pit, but be warned. The next time you come to our woods and ruin our place, you will not be allowed to scamper off so easily. You are a stunted thing who was taught badly, but ignorance is forgivable. If you persist in this folly, however, we will not be so kind again. Now go! It yelled, and I opened my eyes to find that it was morning. I was lying in my hammock, piss dribbling down my leg, and I knew I'd better not be there when the sun set again. I cleaned up everything. I picked up all my garbage, cleaned up the site, poured water over the fire, mixed it with dirt like they always say to do on TV, and then took everything with me and ran for the truck. That was Sunday, and since then, I've been kind of afraid to leave my apartment. What if they're waiting out there for me? What if they find me slipping or don't like that I don't recycle or something like that? What if I offend them and they drag me back to the woods to be punished? That's part of why I'm writing this. If you're like me, someone who doesn't care about their mess or just leaves the woods wrecked, then watch out. Don't let the dark watchers catch you messing up their forest, because they do more than just watch. Don't let them see you slipping, or you might find out what kind of punishment awaits those who anger them.